Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming in to the Convene podcast offices, video podcast office. We're really grateful to have you all the way from Atlanta. Oh my gosh.
Yes, thank you.
You've worked with businesses as an employer owner from 50,000 to 60 billion. That's a big number. I thought ServiceMaster that I worked for was big at 9 billion, but 60 billion is a big company. Mm-hmm. You've done lots of business sales. M&A, business valuations. You worked for Arthur Andersen. You've been in small business. And now you're with CVG Advisors helping people with business valuations and exit strategies. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in. We're going to talk about something really important. There's a lot of business owners who are so busy at their business that they might miss the end game. They might miss the end strategy. They might not even know what the end strategy is. They are working, building, trying to find customers, trying to make sure they know what EBITDA means, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. And yet they're not thinking about what about that day when I might want to leave. And you're an expert at exit strategy and valuations, but you call it a faithful journey, a spiritual journey. Tell us more about that.
That's right. Well, I think it's important that you take the long view, mm-hmm. In most aspects of life, but especially in business. And Jesus certainly did that. I mean, before he died, he knew he had planned out everything after he left and left it to his apostles. And obviously we have, I don't know how many billion people. Is it 4 billion maybe?
I think 6 billion. Six or something billion, in the world.
So obviously his legacy plan was good.
Yeah.
But a lot of people get caught up in the day-to-day, just short-term thinking, and we might take the long view thinking that's 5, 6, 7 years, mm-hmm. but I think as a Christian, you need to be trying as best you can to take the long view that God takes, and maybe it could be 100 years or 200 years as to what role you're playing in God's plan, and really praying about it, thinking about it, taking that journey so that you feel very comfortable at the end with what you're leaving, when you leave this earth, that you've been obedient, that you've done what God has planned for you, and that you did it with a lot of intentionality.
Well, I've talked to many business leaders who I know in their head think about something like this. They might think, sell my company for 10 million, probably end up with 5 million, give $1 million away, live on 4. What do you say to those people who their lawyer might be advising them, their tax person might be advising them, they might have a estate planning rep from a major ministry advising them about a charitable remainder trust? They're confused. They're saying, what do I do? Is it this or this? Is it give more? Is it pay less tax? Can I really pay zero tax? What would you say to those people who are trying to figure this out, but they're hearing confusing, conflicting voices?
Sure, yeah, it can be very confusing and very frustrating. I think that a lot of people are giving advice on the how and the what of exit planning, but there's not a lot of talk about the why. Yeah. And so when they can throw in front of me bits and pieces of what they heard about how they should exit plan or what they should do to exit plan, when I come in and say, well, I think I should sell my business, my question is why?
Okay.
And if they can't explain that to me, then we have more work to do. Like, we should start at square one and figure out, why do you want to sell your business?
Yeah.
If the answer is because that's what my lawyer told me, that's not a very good answer.
Right.
And I think as a Christian, we owe it to ourselves to, or as Christians, we owe it to ourselves to really pray about it and see what we think God's will is. And I've never really seen, quite frankly, a situation where somebody did that, where was very intentional about it and very intentional prayer, really not get a very clear answer and feel very confident and very at peace with the decision they made. So, my advice would be try not to get too confused and try not to get too hung up on the how and the what, but really think about the why. Spend more time thinking about the why, because that's the most important thing that you can determine in your exit plan. The how and the what is a lot easier.
How about some of the common things you hear to that why question? Would somebody say, I'm tired, I want to retire, I want to do ministry? What are some of the things you hear that are maybe not theologically or spiritually sound ideas?
I want to play golf.
I want to play golf.
right? I want to go to the beach.
Uh-huh. I want to relax.
I want to sleep all day. I want to relax. Yeah. I mean, some of these are issues that maybe can be solved other ways than just selling your business, right? But certainly as well, I think that begs another question too, as to what are some of the reasons that people, or what are some of the things that people think about in their legacy planning, and a lot of times they know what they want to do, because once you probe into it, you can figure out that some of them are some of them are shepherds. And very much shepherds, and they want their flock, so to speak, to be very well taken care of. They've brought some of these people to Christ, and they want to keep that culture, and they want to have that legacy live on to where they have disciples of Christ that are sharing the gospel with others, and they don't want to lose that. So that's a much different goal and outlook than let's sell the business for as much as we possibly can, right? So that's why you have to really start at the why, because a lot of times you can start going down the path with someone who might think they know the how and the what and start directing you on that. But once you really figure out the why, you realize that you've just sailed the wrong direction, for a week. And it's a lot of work to go back and then figure out where you need to go. So, anyway, I think that answers.
Yeah,
Hope that answers the question.
So, what would be maybe one of your stories that didn't end as well as it could have because they didn't come to see soon enough that they should have planned? So they come to you with the proceeds in the bank and say, "Can't we reduce my tax?" Something. What are some of the stories that gosh, it turned out so poorly and it could have turned out so much better?
There are so many, but the tax one is I'm also CPA, so that does hit close to home. There's a lot of situations where people either don't get counsel, and I think as Christian men, and you read Proverbs. I mean, we're here to seek wisdom and get counsel from each other, right? That's why you're in convene in the first place, and you should be using that. You're not getting legal counsel. You're not getting tax counsel. I have seen people leave tens of millions of dollars on the table, or in the government's coffers that with 4 or 5 hours of work we could have solved. I mean, it's really sad. But that goes back to who is your quarterback? I mean, who is the person that's advising you in the exit strategy process? Do they know all the bits and pieces that need to go into it? Do they know the why behind what you're trying to accomplish? And they know all the advisors to surround you with. That's important.
So let's talk to the person who has a part-time CFO. They get an annual audit from an accounting firm. They've talked to an estate planning rep from their favorite nonprofit charity, and they're saying, I don't exactly know which one to believe. I don't exactly know which one to do. I guess I'll just sell my company and pay the tax. What would you say to that person if he's sitting across the table from you and they are looking at 5 more years of working?
That's a good question. Again, I go back to the why. But then I like to look at some of the things that they've been told and figure out how does that fit with what you're trying to accomplish, but what do you think of that? If you say, well, I'm just going to go ahead and pay the tax, I say, well, do you want to pay the tax? Yeah, I do. I really support the government. Well, not many people say that.
Not too many people have
answered. Okay, that's fine.
Yes,
but if you don't, do you not want to pay the tax and put it somewhere that is in your estate? Do you not want to pay the tax but want to give it away? Do you not want to pay the tax but get income off it? There's a decision tree involved in all of this that is pretty large. But the great thing about it is that if you take it one step at a time, it's quite simple.
I imagine no one has said to you if they wanted to give $200,000 of the proceeds to their favorite nonprofit, that if you said to them, how does $400,000 sound? I bet you nobody said, no, we don't want to give them that much.
That's right. But it's actually a very, I guess, it's a spiritual experience too when you do see that a lot of people's hearts are actually better than you give them credit for sometimes. I mean, I'm surprised at how much people do want to give away or how much people do care about their employees. And a lot of times people that have exit strategy, I want to say issues, are good problems to have, right? But they have issues because they're in charge of stewarding a lot of resources. They didn't just get there by accident. They got there because they care about people, because they do honest business, because they care about paying less tax and stewarding the money. So these people are generally pretty generous, and it's a pretty fun exercise to talk through with them, where they want to put the money and how they want to steward it. That doesn't mean everybody's like that, but
would you talk about some of your favorite strategies and the nuts and bolts of planning, zero tax planning, estate planning?
Yeah. I like a strategy that starts early.
Letter A, start early.
That
not
is
the day before you sign the papers.
That's right, exactly. I know that is the biggest. That's got to be the biggest error I see just people make, is they just start too late. And that's not news to anybody. If you plan on doing your tax planning on December 27th, that's probably not as good as starting in June. I wish a lot more younger people would start a lot earlier, thinking about what their legacy is going to be, thinking about the long view, thinking about finishing strong. Like if you're running a marathon, you want to think about the 24th, 25th, 26th mile, as you're kind of in mile 8 and 9, as to what's your strategy to finish strong and to really sprint through those last 3 miles. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't think about that till it's up on them.
Right. So number one, start early. And it's possible that whoever might be listening right now, that today would be a good day to start. Not tomorrow, not next week, not 3 years from now, but today they should pick up the phone, call their estate planning people, call CVG, and say, okay, I listened to the podcast, I'm ready to start thinking about this, instead of what I thought before, which was, I can't tell you in my work at Biola University how many people I talked to that came to us and said, I sold my business, I'd love to talk about a gift to the university. And that's too late, isn't it?
Yeah, people come to Christ on their deathbed, so it's never quote unquote too late. But certainly, I think the quality of stewardship goes down as time passes. And I wish people would think about this earlier. I'm in the middle of my career, let's say, and my thinking about my legacy and exit is not focused on my company and my brand that I have now. I think that people a lot of times get caught up in that as to, well, I'm not going to sell my company for 20 years, so why would I think about this? Well, number one, why is your legacy all tied up in your company? It doesn't have to be that. I don't think that's the way God sees it. You have children, you have other people in your life, you have employees. Maybe the best thing for you to do is it's to sell that company at the right time for the right amount of money, and then repurpose that capital into something bigger and better that's going to have hundreds or thousands of employees that come to Christ. So you have to think through that. It's not, and there's this formula of grow your business, sell your business, and retire, which sometimes works out, but to me it's more of a, that's just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see if it sticks, because you get lucky, and sometimes that's the best thing to do, but it's just it's rare that that's the best thing to do.
Well, let me throw out a real scenario. We talked about first thing, which is start now. And here's a phone call I got the other day. I'm getting on a plane, standing in the line to get on the plane, and the gentleman calls and he says, I could have a liquidity event now for a significant amount of money, or I could continue to have my business produce the cash that it produces. Which one should I do?
and you went to the why, right?
And I said,
what's your why?
I actually did. I said, well, what would be the reason to keep your business? How do you feel about your employees? How do you feel about the cash it generates and your ability to give that cash? Because over time, that cash that generates in the next, let's say, 20 years will clearly be more than what you would get today. So let's pretend somebody says, I can sell my business for $3 million today. But you could generate, let's say, $10 million if you had your business for 20 more years, just picking numbers out of the sky. But I think a lot of people get enticed by, oh my gosh, I could have $3 million by Friday.
Yep.
Thoughts?
Yes. So when we start the exit process, it's not all fluff, and it's not just advisory where we sit around and talk about it, and it's not just strategic planning, et cetera. That certainly goes into it. But we get very, very technical. Okay, so we start off with a very detailed cash flow forecast, rolling 12-month cash flow forecast.
Okay.
We want you to understand what your business is throwing off in cash, because that later is going to be the foundation of what the value of your business is, so we can make some financial decisions,
Yep.
right? So, there are very technical aspects of what we do, and we're qualified to do these things. So we start with the rolling cash flow forecast. We eventually move toward a very detailed financial model, which is a valuation for your business. And we really want you to make sure you understand all the nuts and bolts of what's going into the valuation, what makes it more valuable, what makes it less valuable, especially if we're talking about selling and we have some cushion, we can make it more valuable as we're going along. But we really want to make sure that you understand, here's the value of the business today. This is what you could sell it for. Here's your options for that money. Okay, because if I say your company is worth $10 million, here's your investment options. You could invest in your company. You can put it here. You can put it here. You can put it here. I mean, some of these companies are throwing off, 10 to maybe 15% a year or something like that.
Or it's possible there's a charity that has a
Absolutely.
pressing need in their view, whether it be poverty or water or education or whatever the case may be, that they feel like there's a pressing need today to bring a kingdom message to a city, a country, a county, a place, a person, and they might feel like instead of the 10 million being tied up in the bank, wouldn't it be great if a few million of that was allocated to the cause?
Yeah, I mean, we're stewards, right?
Right.
And I always think about, when I think about financial decisions, I'm glad I do this, but I go to the parable of the talents all the time and just think about, what am I doing with the resources that God gave me? Because am I throwing them in something that I have that's an idol, or something that I've grown to identify as part of me,
Yeah.
but it's not part of the kingdom?
Yeah.
What am I doing with those resources for the kingdom to make them grow?
Yeah.
Right? And to further the kingdom. So that's what you got to be careful of, is you're not getting tied to anything too much emotionally, and that you're looking at, it's a stewardship play, but it's also about taking the long view and finishing strong, because we want to take this money and we want to make sure it's purposed in the kingdom, right? And we want to maximize. There's nothing wrong with maximizing profit,
Right.
and maximizing these resources, right? So we want to make sure we don't take those things lightly.
Yeah. I used to hear from the president of the company I worked for quite a while, 20 years, Service Master, and the president, Bill Pollard, used to say, if we don't have profit, we don't have a company to honor God. And there were a number of Christians in the firm who thought mostly about the soft things, right? Honor God, but they weren't on budget. And Bill used to say, what I just said, if there's no profit, we don't have a company to honor God. But what would you say? What would you say to the person who says, I think if I sold the firm, I could do something so much more significant for God by giving the money to a charity, as opposed to what we're talking about, right? The profitability ongoing is actually a good thing. It's not a lesser thing as we look at the parable of talents. Parable of the talents was not just about a spiritual outcome. It was about what do you do with the talent you've been given, right? And it might be to make money and make lots of it.
No, and I think it's timing too, right? I mean, there's different phases of our life where sometimes it's defense and sometimes it's offense, just depending on where God's leading you. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you talked about it being a faithful journey, a spiritual journey. And do you have more thoughts on that and some of the things that you've experienced working with clients where they've seen it finally as a faithful journey, a spiritual journey? And I think it's a bad theology thing, right, where they basically say, well, I think that if I sold the business, parenthetically, which means stop the cash flowing, but if I sold the business and moved to Africa as a missionary, I could do so much more for the kingdom
Mm-hmm.
because there's all these people who need Jesus in this mission agency that I want to be part of, and that'll just be so much more significant than making money. And so one gentleman that I'm thinking of over the last 20 years that I've known finally decided, after doing many, many, many mission trips, that if he kind of cut off the goose that laid the golden eggs, he wouldn't have any more golden eggs to give to this ministry. So he was actually able to be much more effective by giving a lot than with his two little hands and feet going, right? Because he had a particular set of talent and skills in a particular industry where he was a leading performer. But in the mission field, he couldn't dig a well any better than I could dig a well, which is not very good, by the way. And so it's like two hands, 2 feet on the mission field doing something. And somehow you might feel like this is better than making $1 million a year, which it's not unless God calls you to it.
Right.
So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why clearly it's a spiritual journey of, God, what do you want me to, how do you want me to finish? Right? What is it that you want me to do? Is it that you want me to sell this company and put this money somewhere for you and then go work with my hands and spread the gospel, because maybe evangelism is one of my spiritual gifts and I just haven't used it. You gave it to me, but you didn't intend for me to use it until after I sold my company.
That's right.
So that's why I think at the final stages, you can see God, you can hear God, you can get direction from God, so that when you leave this earth, you have total peace of mind. Not only that you're a Christian and you know where you're going, we know that we're going to cheat death, but also that, you're going to get a, well done, my faithful servant type thing, because you were working with God. He did answer your prayers. He closed doors and opened them for you, so you knew what you should be doing and you were obedient. Again, you can say the power of prayer is underestimated. I think we all know that. I think in practice, we don't always live that way. But in this case, it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical that you're executing and that's the why behind it. Because the how and the what is still, that can be pretty worldly. I know God created everything, but if you're going to do an ESOP, you need people on this earth to execute an ESOP.
Right. He needs some hands and feet.
Exactly.
And that's a complicated strategy.
Exactly. But, it could be the right strategy for you. But it all starts with God, and it all starts with the why.
Right.
Right.
Well, let's talk about a little bit of how as we kind of close our time. So what would you say to the person out there who's listening and they say, well, I guess I just have to pay, corporate tax rate or inheritance tax rate or whatever, and they've heard of zero tax planning, but they think it's a myth.
It's definitely not a myth. It's definitely not a myth. It's a lot about knowledge. But I have yet to dig into a business sale or an exit where there were not multiple strategies with either large tax benefits or an ability to defer all the tax, protect it in your estate, et cetera, et cetera. So when you, and that's important that you make sure that you're covering all the different aspects of the exit. Taxes are neglected a lot. Taxes are neglected in a lot of CFOs. I mean, no knock on CFOs, but a lot of them neglect taxes a lot of times. And right now, taxes are a huge percentage of our income. If you really look at it. So, in California, with your state income tax and everything else, I mean, a lot of people are paying more than 50 cents on the dollar in their taxes.
All the ones who didn't move to Nevada.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. But it's not it is what it is proposition, and don't throw your hands up like that.
Yeah.
All you got to do is ask the right expert to take you through that process.
Yeah.
And then just like anything else, it's about I do believe in action, and I believe in being intentional, but I also I don't believe in being reckless, and I think not covering some of the important bases is being reckless. Yes. Not only do you need a good advisor telling you what the whole picture looks like, but you need the different mechanics in the different areas doing the right things. That can be solved easy by starting early, by planning.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're at the last minute rushing through it, mistakes are made, things fall through the cracks, things get forgotten. But if you're methodical and you start early,
Yeah.
the risk of that goes down a lot.
Can we tick off a few more that people might be asking about?
Sure.
Do some in the house. So ESOPs.
ESOPs, for the right person in the right circumstance, can be a good vehicle.
Okay.
And they can be very tax advantaged. They allow the owner to effectively liquidate the business so they get the cash. You have to be careful with an ESOP because you have to make sure that the management that is in place is going to be strong enough, because when that business is sold and those people try to liquidate the business, number one, the management that's left behind has to be able to run the business effectively. But number two, when that business is sold, I've seen a lot of companies completely fall apart in that process. I know I have a very specific example. I can't tell the company, but there was a company that had an ESOP, and the employees were unionized. And it's funny, if you read the judge's opinion in the bankruptcy proceeding, he said, you guys bankrupted a company that you owned.
Yeah, oops.
With your own, and so the company went under. That's an extreme example. But if you think about, I've got 12 people, all with different backgrounds, different profiles, this and that. Oh, one of these people died, and they didn't have, the person that stepped in, it wasn't a good situation, the valuation was wrong, or there's a lot of issues that can happen there. So, if you have the right management team in place, if you have a good exit strategy for them. So an ESOP is an exit strategy for you. Who's doing the exit strategy for the employees?
Right.
Because if they don't have a good one, if you're trying to take care of them, that's not a very good way to take care of them.
Yeah, how will your employees know that you love them? Maybe that's not one of the
If you say, my team is a little bit weak, I might say, you know what, I really think we might want to look at selling the company and writing them checks, because they might be better off that way than giving them this asset which looks like they may not be able to steward properly.
Right.
So that's...
How about little-known facts about charitable remainder trusts that people might say, I've heard about them, but I don't really understand it?
Little-known facts. Well, I think little-known facts are that they're not too good to be true. Obviously, the money that you put in there are some restrictions on it.
Yeah.
They're good for certain situations. There are other vehicles. For instance, there's a vehicle I like a lot called a deferred sales trust, where you can accomplish much of the same thing. You're not tied to a charity necessarily. And again, I'm not saying that charity is a bad thing, but you have to make sure that it fits exactly what you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes that is more... It's good if you want to make sure that money goes to charity. If you're using it just as a tax deferral vehicle, which people do, they think maybe that's one of their only options. That's not the right reason to use a charitable remainder trust. I just got this big boatload of money, and I'm going to die in about 5 years, and I just don't want, maybe I'm not confident in the stewardship of some of the people that are going to inherit this. So I want to make sure it's going to the right place.
Yeah. Well, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for making the journey from Atlanta.
Thank you for
my
having me.
prayer, and I'm sure it's yours as well, is that maybe there's somebody listening who did, in fact, decide to do something today, this week, instead of a week before their sale goes through, or instead of come and see you the day after their sale goes through. And that's not the best time to do it. So we'll just pray that somebody listening somewhere in the world is going to do something today. So thanks for coming, and we appreciate your work with Convene and your membership in Convene. And thanks for giving these tips and advice to people out there who are in the midst of thinking about legacy, business valuation, tax planning, estate planning, zero tax planning. We really appreciate you coming out.
Thank you. Thanks for
All right.
having me.
Thanks.